Canada's Housing Action Plan is the federal government's attempt to encourage affordable housing. I'm focusing on my home, Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, but this applies to other cities throughout Canada. First off, it is the responsibility of provinces, of the provincial governments, to provide social services and address housing needs. Provinces have failed. Federal and municipal governments, as well as private volunteer organizations, have stepped up to help with the housing crisis. The proposed emergency shelter in Sutherland has been cancelled. It was discussed in a previous video. Link is in the description. No provincial MLAs were publicly involved in the shelter. No residents were consulted. Instead, the ward councillor held an unofficial public meeting to seek input. On Wednesday, March 5th, the shelter discussion was added partway through the council meeting. It was not on the original agenda. No public notice was given to residents. The public did not get a chance to speak for or against the shelter. A 250-meter limit between shelters and elementary schools was passed into bylaw. There are currently no shelter plans for the entire east side of Saskatoon. There is no shelter on one half of the entire city. The nearest shelter is the lighthouse. I'm here in front of the lighthouse, with the lighthouse behind me. I was out last night with the Sage Clan patrol group, and it was minus 30, about minus 40 with the wind chill, 30 centimeters. I think it was 30 to 60 centimeters over the past weekend. It's Tuesday now, and there were absolutely no places for people to go who were out in the cold. There were people sleeping in doorways.
The administration, has concluded the Lighthouse has failed to fully deliver the programs and services which made them eligible for the tax abatement under the program. Namely, the emergency shelter, stabilization unit, and the mobile outreach are the components of the program that make them eligible under this program. The tax abatement for the Lighthouse is approximately $82,000 in total, and that includes the city, the education, and the library taxes. So the overall tax abatement that will be provided to the Lighthouse will be 50% of that total.
It's winter on the Canadian prairies, and there were no shelters available on Monday, March 4th, due to a large snowstorm and workers being unable to get to the shelters to work at them. So, a few hundred people who are unhoused in Saskatoon slept outside. Even on a typical day, there are not enough beds, shelter spaces in Saskatoon for even half the unhoused population. Moving ahead on topics, Council addressed another issue: the Canadian Housing Action Fund. What help is available for Canadians buying a home? Cities and municipalities apply for funding and must meet criteria to increase housing density. Legalize up to 4 units citywide. Legalize up to 4 stories within 800 meters of planned rapid transit. Reduce or eliminate parking requirements near rapid transit routes, and increase housing density near post-secondary institutions. It makes sense, if removing parking and adding high-density housing, to provide public transit to residents.
And on February 28th, the city, the federal government, announced the city's successful application for the Housing Accelerator Fund in the amount of $41.325 million. The funding will be provided to the city in 4 installments, 25% per year. The majority of the funding is being allocated to fund incentive programs.
Don't get too excited. The Canadian Housing Action Plan is just over $10 million per year to Saskatoon, an amount too small to affect housing prices, but a better effort than the provincial government. Plans very similar to the one in Saskatoon are happening in cities across Canada. Residents of a city pay taxes to their city, provincial, and federal government. Provinces transfer the money to housing organizations, such as SHC, who transfers the money to the city through leases or property taxes. The federal government transfers money to the housing organization CHMC, who transfers money to the city through grants or direct payments. Each transfer of money requires meetings, wages to be paid, and bank fees. taxes are eventually returned to a community for housing, but with far less than the original amount extracted from residents. That's the Canadian Housing Plan in action. Taxes should be spent efficiently. Canadians shouldn't be sleeping outside in -30. All Canadians must have clear, achievable steps through trauma and financial hardship to home ownership. Thank you for watching. I would love to hear your comments about Canada's housing and what some possible solutions might be.